I'm always struggling to not have what Ants Fektovich calls political depression, where the what you used to do to alter the political conditions around you, or at least to make you feel better because you were resisting them, no longer give you that feeling anymore. Because it's truly mind-boggling and sad. So let me give you maybe three things. One, I think the way in which we do not care about the death of thousands of people is astounding, right? That the amount of people that died in the 91 bombardment of Iraq by the Americans is unknown. The amount of people that died as a result of Americans allowing the Saddam to mow down people in the 1991 insurgency that people fought against to try to topple Saddam, that was undermined by Americans because Americans were afraid of who would take over for Saddam. And so instead, the CIA was attempting to find ways of toppling Saddam but keeping the Ba'ath government in there. And there's all of this now documents that are coming out to show the different ways in which they were trying to pick who was going to win. And in the process of picking, they were okay with thousands of people being murdered by Saddam's army while they were there. Like, they could see them coming into the barracks, taking their weapons. Then General Schwarzkopf in the treaty that they signed with Saddam allowed Saddam to use his helicopters and his fighter jets when he could have easily not allowed them to. So there was that. Then the 500,000 to 1 million people that die as a result of the sanctions, put that aside too. Then as a direct result of the war, we don't know. The estimates are between 100,000 to 1 million people that died. And the fact that that number is so wide itself says something, because at that point it's like ridiculous. It doesn't matter. 100,000 to 1 million. I mean, that's not even a range that makes any sense. But it's because who cares, right? The life of an Iraqi is not worth that much. So on the one hand, you have that, but then on the other hand, there was the insurgency of Iraqis that at the time when I was there in 2005, there was one memo that came out that said that on a daily basis, there were 411 attacks against American military presence in American military targets in Iraq on a daily basis, spread throughout all of Iraq. And of course, what was reported is that all of these insurgents were one Sunni, two connected to Al-Qaeda. So one of the ways in which Americans weren't able to be successful is specifically because of the resistance of Iraqis and what Iraqis then did that altered American plans in Iraq. So that's point one. Like, we just have no way of contending with that death, and we want so that exists. The second, I do feel, mostly as a teacher, I could speak about this continued experience of these veterans coming to me once they find out I'm Iraqi, to want to talk about their experience in Iraq and what they did in a confessional way, to be like, look, I've done terrible things. And folks who have, it's very clear that they were traumatized by what they did, none of which they understood at the time they were doing. They only figured out later. So, these are people who are, like, let's say on a ship that is, the missiles are going from the ship to Iraq, and they're the ones pushing the buttons, but they don't know that this is killing people in the ground. And so I had a student of mine who then says, I only made the connection because I was reading the news and the time of day things happened and what was happening on my ship, and I was able to put two and two together. Or soldiers who were being trained in counterinsurgency operations in spaces owned and operated by Blackwater at the time in the U.S., in which I had a student who was told him and his friend he was a brown dude, and his friend who's black were made to dress up as Arabs so that more advanced senior military SEALs who are training could train on them as insurgency. So they're like having to take the positionality of an Iraqi in a training setting where they're going to be shot down by counterinsurgency folks who are Americans in training. So in some senses, I mean, that gives me a sense of maybe a hope that then you have these people who are now, I mean, these students of mine are all now working and writing and talking against the military because of the experiences that they had. So that gives me a sense of hope. But then I come to a place like now, the 20th anniversary of the war, and you turn on New York Times, you turn on, or you don't turn on the New York Times, but you read the New York Times or you turn on the news media, and it's as if, again, what happened in Iraq is a complete fantasy that they're telling. So that, you know, the stories is of the American Sniper, the movie that becomes like one of the top grossing movies of all time. These are still, you know, the shows and the movies that are getting made talking about Iraq. So there is a very willful construction of a narrative about how we're supposed to remember Iraq. In fact, what is happening now in Ukraine in terms of America's positionality or position within the war in Ukraine is part of it is attempting to reposition itself as somehow being the arbiter or having a moral superiority or a moral high ground, because in some ways it lost that in Iraq. And so it's whitewashing, or it's washing itself of kind of that memory, so that we are now remembering Iraq in a different way. And again, part of me feels like it has to do that. This is part and parcel of how the United States and I think liberalism has to operate. It operates through liberal racism, for me, operates through construction of difference, and then saying those things that are different are very distant from each other, both spatially and temporally, and then through disavowal. So difference, distance, and disavowal. So like, this place is different from that place, and we no longer are responsible for that place because it was so long ago, temporally. And whatever happens, it's not us. You disavow any kind of culpability in that. And you have to do that, because to not do that then is to take responsibility, to say that you're culpable, that you are part of the problem, that then you look at the other and say it's your fault. So everything that they say about the Muslim as a cultural deficiency of the Muslim, that they are savage, that they're barbaric, that they are backwards, that they are against law and order, those are, you know, the very things that they have to disavow from, or they have to contend with the fact that those are the very things that describe them. And so then that becomes a problem. So to hold yourself, you have to say that, like, I am not an imperialist, even though I have an empire. You know, I'm against those things, even though those are the very things that I do.